we didn't hear about any other player apart from Frankie de Jong. This is the target, and it's him or it ain't anyone. Whereas this time, United are almost looking at, this is the profile of player we want, and this is the amount of money we believe each of these players is worth. So we're going to talk and try and negotiate deals for all of these players.
Hello and welcome to Stretford Paddock. My name is Joe and this is a one-on-one interview, and returning today is Dharmesh Sheth from Sky Sports News, our transfer guru. How are you doing, Dharmesh?
Well, I've been called worse.
It's
I'm all right.
Well,
all right.
We got you on in January to be the transfer expert, and there were no transfers, so you couldn't really be the expert of anything. We've already had a transfer. Manchester United have already made a transfer.
Yes, they have. The one that was expected, I think. It did take a little bit longer. I think it was a lot to do with personal terms and representatives and that kind of thing, because United negotiated a higher fee for Zirkzee than his release clause, but managed to get that in exchange for favourable payment terms. And it's only like, I think it was only about €2.5 million above what the release clause was. So, look, I've not seen enough of him to say this is an incredible signing, but judging by the teams that were in for him, judging by the fact that he was in the Dutch squad for the Euros, it looks like a positive signing, this one. Young, good profile, so maybe reason to be optimistic.
Yeah, it sounds like it, doesn't it? I've got loads of questions for you, loads of different players, and that's sort of testament to the fact that it seems like United have genuine interest in quite a lot of different players. Just on that, before we get into the specifics, before the window, reports of United, even as low as 30 million net spend, I saw one place then, there was some people saying 50, some people saying 100. The fact that we're linked with so many players, and all the reports are that it might be multiple centre-backs, it might be multiple strikers, it might be a midfielder and a left-back, or does it seem to you that maybe that 50 million sort of net spend was wide of the mark, or are we much more confident in sales that haven't happened yet, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I'm not necessarily. I think when you hear reports of what a transfer war chest is, to borrow a very, very old phrase, it depends who you believe. Manchester United are never publicly going to tell people or journalists what the actual budget is for a club, because it doesn't do them any favours. If it's a really high budget, then clubs feel that they can add even more onto what's now called the Manchester United tax. You'll be paying even more money than before. I think this, with the timing of how the windows work just now, and with these PSR rules in place, I think United were not in a position where they were sailing that close to the wind with regard to PSR and breaching those rules. We weren't getting that information that they were in danger of breaching them. And that's pure, we mentioned January just then. That's one of the reasons why they didn't go big in January, as didn't a lot of clubs in the Premier League, because they had one eye on June the 30th. Once June the 30th is done, you've got another 1 year rolling in the PSR cycle. And so you could actually spend as much as you want after June the 30th, provided by June the 30th, 2025, you're in good shape again and you've made enough sales to be able to counter that. So I think the way budgets work is slightly different now to before, when the PSR rules were around. You've seen what Chelsea have done in the past when they've spent £1 billion odd, but they've still managed to sell well before June the 30th, hence why they haven't breached those rules. So I think it's a mix of what the budget would be, the rules that are in place and the timings of those rules, and also, of course, sales, which United notoriously haven't been able to do really well in the past. But I've just seen signs of that side of the business improving, given how they're trying to do certain deals, particularly academy players, which I'm sure we'll come to in a minute.
Yeah, well, let's just get straight into that then. Obviously, you've mentioned it there. Willy Camboala looks like, well, let's say looks like the deal has been done there. 10 million euros to Villarreal, and obviously 10 million euros isn't a load of money, but United have been getting 500,000 and a million and 1.5 million euros for academy players in recent seasons. Do you see United, as you mentioned, they're sort of taking a shift to focus more on sales? Because like you said, the difference between us and Chelsea in terms of revenue, United earn more, but their ability to buy players is based on how well they sell, isn't it?
Yeah, that's true. And like I said before, I'm starting to see signs that United are really, really targeting how they're selling players. Whereas before, they would just be out of the door and be like, we haven't made any money on this. I can't tell you right now if £10 million for Willy Kwambala is a good deal for Villarreal, a good deal for United, a good deal for everyone. But what United are doing is inserting buyback clauses in these deals and sell-on clauses, significant sell-on clauses. So you've got a situation now that if he does do well and United think, God, he can be a Man United player still, then they're not having to pay over the odds for a player that they've sold. And if they decide, no, we don't want him back, but he's done so well, he's going to get an even bigger move, then there's still money coming in to United off the back of that initial sale of Kwambala. They did it with Alvaro Fernandez, I think, as well, when he went to Benfica. So when you look at the initial fee, people were like, well, that's not great. But there are income streams if and when Fernandez does well for that club and if and when he was to get sold. I've even read, just going off on a slight tangent, when you're talking about Mason Greenwood, and I know that people will always say, £80 million, £100 million player, but for whatever the circumstances, United aren't going to get that. And the deal that they've agreed with Marseille, whether he goes to Marseille or not, is around the £30 million mark. But what they've inserted in that deal is a significant sell-on clause. And whenever we talk about significant sell-on clauses, it's normally 15 to 20%. And you're thinking that is a lot, because if he gets sold on for another 70 million on his next move, you're looking at, 14, 15 million that would come to United. But United have negotiated sell-on clauses for any interested parties for Greenwood of between 40 and 50%. So if you look at Mason Greenwood and think he's an £80 million player, if United are getting 30 odd million now, and then he gets sold for 80 million later on, they're going to be making 40 million on that as well. So there's always that, that caveat that United are trying to insert into these deals, whereby longer term, they are going to be getting income streams from these players, even though initially it might not look like they're going to be making too much money on them.
Yeah, that's. When if you think of that as a sort of business thing, if you were to sell a business for a lump sum and still own 50% of any further sales of that business, that would be, it's essentially what the Glazers have done with Man United, isn't it, I suppose? But it would be a very sort of strong position to be in, wouldn't it? You sell Mason Greenwood for 30 million euros or pounds, and then you own 50% of the next sale as well. That is, like you said, fantastically strong position to be in. Let's move on to some this sort of centre-back situation. I think it is becoming a bit of a situation, actually, because we've got sort of almost, there's more than three, but three very strong competing names in that position at the moment. You've got Branthwaite, you've got Ligt, and you've got Leny Yoro. Now, I'll separate Branthwaite for a second and we'll come back to that. But Ligt and Yoro, reports this morning out of The Athletic and other places that these two are potentially sort of tied together a little bit, that United could get Ligt if we wanted almost, but we're kind of focusing on Yoro and we're waiting to see his decision about will he join us or Real Madrid. Is that your understanding?
Yeah, I've just read that today as well. United are going for all three players. I'm not saying they're going to sign all three players. They want to sign at least one of them. And signing more than one of them is going to be dependent on what happens with sales, which we've kind of touched upon, and I'm sure we'll talk about in a second as well. The Ligt one, if you look at that situation, if it is going to be one or the other with Yoro, then it would explain why it is taking a little bit longer for this Ligt deal to go through. Simply because all of the ingredients seem to be there for their deal to get done. Because Bayern Munich want the deal, the player wants the deal, the fee is not insurmountable as far as Manchester United are concerned, because they want 50 million euros plus performance-related add-ons, and that's their starting point. So United would negotiate on that fee. So on the face of it, you would think, right, they can go out and get Ligt. I just think that a lot of the noise from this is coming from the Bayern and the agent side with regard to De Ligt, whereas from the United side, they just want to take a step back here and they want to make sure they get the right signing in. And because the Leny Yoro one has presented an opportunity for them, they're well within their rights and probably wise to just think, let's just see what can happen with this. Because what has happened is all of the noises around Leny Yoro are that he's not necessarily a player that loads of clubs have looked at and thought he's going to fit into the kind of profile of player that we want. It's rather he is being described as a generational talent. He's 18 years old and everyone is raving about this kid. And so it's like a unique market opportunity for a club to try and get a player of his ability, regardless of whether that's the kind of profile of player that they're looking for or not, because it's too good a potential deal to turn down. Now, United have actually agreed with Lille. That's why there might be this delay with De Ligt. So they've agreed with Lille for 50 million euros. Now, Lille agreeing to that deal is another way of them saying 50 million euros is what it's going to take to get this player. And it's the cynic in you could suggest that that's their way of fishing Real Madrid out, because they're obviously not matching what Manchester United are prepared to pay. Now, it's all going to come down to Leny Yoro effectively, because he holds all the cards here now because he's only got a year left on his contract. The noises are that his preference is Real Madrid. However, because United are still in the mix, it would suggest that the door hasn't been closed on United. That's probably why they're still hanging in there and have a degree of optimism that maybe there is a deal to be done for Yoro. Maybe there's a chance that he would come to Old Trafford. The only issue that United and Lille have got is this contract situation. And if Leny Yoro decides it's Real Madrid, even though United have agreed, and even if Real Madrid can't agree with Lille, I only want to go to Real Madrid, he only has to wait 5 months to be able to sign a pre-contract agreement with a club outside France, namely Real Madrid, and then go for free next summer. And that's what's hanging over Lille, because they can say till they're blue it's 50 million euro. If he does not go to United and Real Madrid don't meet that price, Lille are going to have a decision to make. Do they allow him to see out his contract and go for what would be a smaller fee, because they'll still get a bit of compensation for training costs and all of that kind of thing? Or do they accept a lower offer from Real Madrid, but what is potentially going to be higher than what they'd get if they let him go for nothing next summer? That's the problem that Lille have got. If he even had 1 more year left on his contract, it would be so much easier for them. But they're in such a situation now that it's clear that that's what they're going to do, accepting this 50 million euro offer from Man United. Right, this is the price.
Yep.
Real Madrid will be pretty relaxed about it, because if they believe the player wants to go to them, they don't really have to do too much. They don't really have to do too much. So, but while United are still in the mix, you would think that there is a chance, because if United have agreed with Lille, then it's clear they would have been given permission to speak to Yoro and his representatives. So if those talks have taken place and United haven't pulled out of that deal just yet, there must be some kind of noise that there is a potential that a deal could happen. So that's probably why we're hearing now that it could be one of De Ligt or Yoro. And I'm saying it could be 2 of the 3. The Branthwaite one won't go away either. They really want to sign Jarrad Branthwaite. They've made 2 bids. It's clear that they want the player, but not at the price that Everton are trying to charge. So 50 million is how United have gone so far, unless they're going to get some indication that Everton are going to, bring that price down or be willing to have some sort of negotiation, then that will probably dictate whether United go in for a 3rd time. If they don't, I just wonder, the only other way potentially that there could be a deal that could materialize, and you see it so many times, and I don't know whether this would happen or not, this is just me thinking out loud, is if Branthwaite started agitating to go, because I wonder how much of a factor that would have. But Everton could just say, we don't care. we don't need to sell. We don't want to sell. You're staying. You're under contract. End of story.
Yeah.
They can quite easily do that, which appears to be the case at the moment.
It's quite the sort of love triangle at the minute with centre-back transfers, isn't it? One's linked to the other one. Branthwaite's separate, but he's the most expensive by the sounds of things. Yoro, we want him. Does he want us? I wonder if... I mean, I'm sure they'll be very aware, won't they? Because we spoke about this earlier in the window, and it's been reported, that INEOS are keen to not look like the Glazers in transfers, not repeat the mistakes of the past.
Yeah.
So this whole thing of chasing Yoro, who might not want to join, doesn't that feel a bit like the De Jong saga?
If we're going to say that they don't want to repeat that, then by deduction, are they getting some kind of indication that there's a possibility the deal can happen? And I know that might sound similar to with Frankie de Jong and Jadon Sancho in the past, but I think they want to avoid that. Look, if in 4 weeks' time, United haven't signed a centre-back and we're still talking about, will Yoro come? Are they going to go back in for Branthwaite? Then yes, you could start then thinking nothing much has changed. But I think the intention at the moment is that not to happen. They don't want to get drawn into these long-running sagas at all. I mean, of course, if it might happen, but if they're confident the deal is going to happen, but it's all to do with the price between a club, then that can take a little while. And maybe there's a bit of slack that needs cutting there, a little bit. But if it's like it was before, where it's, the player wants to go, but it's clear that Barcelona aren't going to sell in the case of Frankie de Jong and all of this, then, it's fruitless come the last couple of weeks of the window when you're still talking about the player. So I think what United have done this time, which is different to what happened in previous windows, when I take the Frankie de Jong situation in isolation, it was just Frankie de Jong. We didn't hear about any other player apart from Frankie de Jong. This is the target, and it's him or it ain't anyone. And it didn't happen. Whereas this time, United are almost looking at, this is the profile of player we want. And this is the amount of money we believe each of these players is worth. So we're going to talk and try and negotiate deals for all of these players. And whichever one we feel is the right deal is the one we're going to press play on. Rather than it's Branthwaite and there's no other player they're in for. Because then you could almost accuse, this feels very familiar. But the fact of the matter is this time, it feels like they want Branthwaite, but it's Everton who are very unwilling sellers. They're in for Ligt, and everyone wants the deal to get done, particularly from the agent and the selling club side. But they've also got this Yoro one in the background as well. So they're trying to just get all their ducks in a row before they say, right, these are the one or two players that they want.
Yeah, I do think that is a big distinction, a big difference. We didn't get linked to Casemiro until the De Jong deal was already dead.
Yes.
After the season had started. So that is a good point. And I think it sort of we've got to remember as well. There's still 6 weeks of the window left. We've got plenty of time here. We're sort of scarred by those transfers of the past where we're spending all summer on someone who maybe doesn't really want to join.
I don't think they want to go into the season without having all their players in,
Good.
Because what can happen as well is if you start the season badly and you haven't completed your transfer window, then a club that you might have a deal with might feel that they can raise the price of a player. And then there's pressure on United to bring that player in, regardless. I'll just pay the extra 10.
Yeah.
They don't want to find themselves in that position because you mentioned the Casemiro one. It's an absolute case in point. The season had started. They'd already lost their first 2 games to Brighton and Brentford that season. And then he came in. And then Anthony came in.
Yeah.
That can't be allowed to happen again. And I think the noises that you get from INEOS is that, I mean, look, I'm not saying they're going to say it's not going to happen again, but it feels like it's not going to happen this time.
Yeah, they seem to be very aware of how they need to look different to the Glazers, don't they? That seems to be, their PR seems to be pretty spot on so far. And it's interesting that we've got, as United fans, we've almost got like a phrase and a player for every negative scenario. Dragging it out all summer only to not get them is a sort of, is a De Jong. You know, paying an extra 20 million because it's the last week of the window, that's an Anthony. You know, getting someone early and then they're injured all season, that's a Mason Mount. Like, we've got all these like negative cards we can play because we've seen it all before. Let's move on a little bit then, because that centre-back situation is sort of like a house of cards, isn't it? When one goes, we'll see what happens with the other ones. Ugarte, Manuel Ugarte from PSG has been the main name that's been linked. I think it does seem as though we've focused a lot on this centre-back situation. Ugarte seems to be the main name that's linked. There hasn't been a lot of updates in the last few days. Some reports, maybe less reliable outlets saying, you know, there's a deal almost in place there, 40 million, 45 million euros or so. Others saying it's nowhere near as advanced as you might think. What's your understanding of that deal?
I think PSG want to do a deal. Yeah, he would probably want to go as well. I don't think he got as much game time as he would have wanted, and probably PSG and probably moving on from him. But also, United might be looking at the whole situation as well, in that they probably need to raise money in that area as well and free up squad space in that area as well. And the Casemiro situation, I mean, we were talking about him just joining, 2 seasons ago. He's the one that could raise probably the most amount of money for them to be able to fund a deal for Ugarte. I'm not saying that they couldn't fund a deal without a sale of Casemiro, but they probably want to do that with regard to squad space as well. So we do know that Saudi clubs are very interested. I think United are now expecting that interest to become more formal in the coming weeks for Casemiro. And while that's happening, dialogue is still open with Paris Saint-Germain over Ugarte. You got to remember as well, you talked about, you know, Euro 2024, there was a Copa America as well. And some of the signings that United are going for, they weren't involved in either competition, but some of them are. And Ugarte was, and he went deep into the competition. He went, you know, he played the most amount of games you could in that Copa America because they got to the 3rd, 4th place playoff. So he will just be returning now. So with that in mind, United will probably have seen that situation, but they will also be very aware that squad space and budget-wise and money-wise, they will need to release players as well, because it can't just simply be a case of Casemiro stays and then they'll just bring in Ugarte.
Well, that obviously sort of begs the question then. What is the situation with Casemiro? Because it seems as though it's sort of, people just sort of loosely throw the word Saudi Arabia out there as though they're just going to...
There's strong interest.
Okay.
There's definitely strong interest from Saudi Arabia, and it's one of those ones where the Saudi window will start kicking into gear now. We're hearing about Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang going to Saudi Arabia. This could be the first of a few deals that start happening. With regard to Saudi, I don't think they're going to do what they did a couple of summers ago when they're spending absolute truckloads of money on players, but it'll be more targeted what their approach would be. Now, Casemiro is definitely a player of interest. There are clubs there who do want to sign him. There are clubs who have explored the conditions of a potential deal, which is why I'm saying once they've got all of that information, I think United are expecting the interest to become more formal. And then a decision will be made with regard to what they want to do with Casemiro, and of course what Casemiro wants to do, because, you know, you could have interest from everywhere. He doesn't have to go anywhere. He's still under contract. He was captaining United in their first pre-season game against Rosenborg yesterday, so he's still there. It's just the case of, if the deal is right for all parties, then a potential deal can be done. But in the background, United are doing their work on potential midfielders, and Ugarte is one that's been talked about throughout this window, but they'll have other targets in that area as well.
And just finally then, obviously you've covered lots of transfer windows, Man United, other clubs, but obviously focusing on Manchester United. To me, looking from, you know, the outside as a fan, it seems as though there are a lot less sort of random names being thrown out there. Like every year, there's a Neymar pops up, or have United made a bid for Messi, or is Ronaldo coming back for a third time? Like all these things that you hear. It seems as though maybe it's because I don't know if INEOS are giving a bit more information away to their sources or whether it's just a lot more focused. But it doesn't seem as though there's this kind of random, every year we always talk about 40, 50 names United have been linked with. It seems a lot narrower than that this year. Is that something you've noticed? Does it seem more targeted from United?
I've used this word before. It's targeted. That's what it feels like this time. And it's not a case of they've got primary targets. Well, publicly, they won't say that there's a primary target because they don't want to put themselves in that position where they want to go for this player and he's the number one target. I don't think they want to paint it in that way. They basically looked at the squad and said, this is the profile of player that we want. And there are more than one player in European football or wherever else who can fulfill that profile. So let's see which ones we think are the best for that particular position, and let's try and formulate a deal. And if one of these deals comes off, it will be more on the terms that we want to do this deal on. So it doesn't hurt for United to have 3 or 4 targets in the central defensive position, because number one, yes, there clearly will be interest in all of these players, but also they can subconsciously tell another club by going for another player, well, we're happy to move on. This is not the be all or end all if we sign your player or not, because we've got another target here. So if it's one of those ones where they're getting close to evaluation and still being rebuffed, there's nothing to stop United saying, thanks, but no thanks. We might revisit this, but at the moment, we're going to focus on an alternative target. Not necessarily a number 2 or number 3 choice, but one of the ones that they said was alongside the one that they were about to buy. So it seems to be that kind of approach where it's not going for these big Galactico names that you mentioned before. It seems a lot more targeted. It seems a lot more, these are the positions and these are the players. Already they've got Zirkzee in. And if you look back on previous windows, we mentioned the Casemiro and the Antony situation. That was, it just looked like panic stations the whole time. Yeah. For some reason, this time, it doesn't feel like there's panic there. It feels like that there is a proper approach on how they want to do these transfers. I could be completely wrong, and it could end up being the same as previous seasons, but from what I've seen so far and how they've approached it, it doesn't feel that way.
Well, that's really good to hear, because that's the thing we've been wanting to see, isn't it, from INEOS, from Ratcliffe and Ashworth and the people involved in these deals, is that it feels like we're almost manufacturing a kind of a situation for ourselves where, like you said, we don't have to get one specific player, and hopefully that will help us in the negotiation for all the players we speak to. But so far, like you said, Zirkzee already in, this precarious situation with the centre-backs, and obviously central midfield has been looked at as well. It seems like United are actually getting going, so fantastic. Thank you very much, Dharmesh, for coming on.
No problem.
Thank you again for joining us and giving us updates on all of these deals. This has been a one-on-one interview with Dharmesh Sheth from Sky Sports News. Thanks for watching.